I stood alone in my cap and gown, scanning the empty auditorium seats where my parents should have been sitting. Today was my college graduation, the culmination of 4 years of engineering studies with highest honors, and they had chosen their annual Super Bowl party over witnessing this milestone. My phone buzzed with drunken videos from their house, showing friends cheering at the television, while I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with nobody there to see it. 20 minutes later, I was crying in the parking lot, pulling out my phone to buy a one-way ticket to Seattle with my emergency fund. The plane touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport 3 days after graduation, and I stepped off with nothing but 2 overstuffed suitcases and $800 in my checking account. The reality of my impulsive decision hit me as I rode the Link Light Rail downtown, watching the unfamiliar cityscape roll past through rain-streaked windows. I had no job, no apartment, and no plan beyond escaping the suffocating disappointment of my family. I found temporary housing at the Green Tortoise Hostel in Pike Place Market, paying $60 per night for a cramped bunk bed in a room shared with backpackers from around the world. The cheerful chaos of international travelers felt like a strange comfort after the sterile suburban environment I had fled. My roommates were a German photographer documenting American food culture, a French exchange student extending her visa, and an Australian bartender working his way across the continent. 3 days into my Seattle adventure, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from my mother. I expected an apology, maybe even concern about my sudden departure. Instead, I found an attached invoice that made my stomach drop to the floor. The document was professionally formatted with their home address as the billing location, and my name listed as the responsible party. Super Bowl party. Catering invoice. Amount due $5,000. The itemized charges were absurd in their detail. Premium buffalo wings at $18 per pound. Craft beer selection featuring local breweries at $250. Professional bartender services for 8 hours at $300. Custom decorations themed around their favorite team for $400. Even a line item labeled disappointment surcharge for $500, explaining that my absence from their celebration required extensive explanations to guess about my whereabouts. My hands shook as I scrolled through the ridiculous charges. Gourmet cheese platters, imported olives, specialty cocktail ingredients, rented furniture to accommodate extra guests, professional cleaning services for the aftermath, and even valet parking for their friends. The final insult was a note at the bottom claiming my abandonment of family obligations had forced them to upgrade their party to distract from the embarrassment of having a son who failed to appreciate family traditions. Before I could process the invoice fully, my phone rang with my father's number. His voice was slurred but angry when I answered, launching into a tirade about my selfishness and ingratitude. According to his alcohol-fueled logic, my sudden departure to Seattle had humiliated them in front of their social circle. They had spent the entire Super Bowl Sunday explaining to guests that their son had suffered some kind of breakdown and disappeared instead of celebrating with the family. "You owe us that money," Brooke, he declared with the entitled confidence of someone who had never been challenged. "We invested 18 years in raising you, and this is how you repay us. Running off to play homeless in some liberal city while we deal with the fallout of your selfishness." My mother took the phone next, her voice switching between tearful manipulation and cold calculation. She explained that they had told everyone I failed my final exams and was too ashamed to attend graduation, which justified my absence from their party. The lie was easier than admitting their son chose education over entertainment, apparently. She insisted that paying for their catering cost was the least I could do to compensate for the emotional damage my departure had caused. $5,000 is nothing compared to the embarrassment you put us through, she said with conviction that suggested she genuinely believed her own words. Your father's boss was at that party, Brooke. Do you understand how this affects his career when his own son is mentally unstable? I hung up without responding, staring at the invoice on my phone screen while my German roommate quietly offered me a cup of tea. The kindness of a stranger contrasted sharply with the cruelty of people who shared my DNA. That night I lay in my hostel bunk listening to the gentle snoring of travelers from 3 different continents, people who had shown me more compassion in 3 days than my parents had in years. The next morning I walked down to Pike Place Market and applied for a job at Victrola Coffee Roasters, a local shop tucked between the famous fish vendors and flower stalls. The manager, Carol, was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and paint under her fingernails from her side business creating murals. She hired me on the spot after learning I had customer service experience from working campus jobs during college. "You look like someone who needs a fresh start," she said with the intuition of someone who had hired plenty of people running from something. "This city has a way of helping people figure out who they really are when nobody else is telling them." Training at the coffee shop provided welcome distraction from my parents' increasingly frequent text messages demanding payment. They had escalated from daily reminders to hourly threats about damaging my credit and contacting potential employers to warn them about my financial irresponsibility. Each message felt like a small knife twist, but the rhythmic routine of grinding beans and steaming milk offered therapeutic meditation. My co-workers were a diverse collection of artists, students, and professionals supplementing their income in Seattle's expensive economy. They welcomed me without questions about my past, accepting my presence as naturally as the tide accepts another wave. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere without having to earn approval through achievement or compliance. The morning rush at Victrola taught me valuable lessons about human nature. Customers appreciated genuine attention and competent service without dramatic performance or emotional manipulation. Success came from consistency and skill, rather than navigating complex family politics or meeting impossible expectations. Each satisfied customer felt like a small victory in rebuilding my confidence. By the end of my first week, I had earned enough to cover another week of hostel fees and buy groceries from Pike Place Market vendors. The financial independence was modest but meaningful after years of my parents monitoring every expense and questioning every purchase. Freedom tasted like fresh salmon from the fish market and locally roasted coffee beans from my new workplace. During quiet moments between customers, I researched entry-level engineering positions in Seattle's thriving aerospace industry. Boeing Blue Origin and dozens of smaller companies offered opportunities that seemed impossible from my hometown, but achievable in a city that valued innovation over family connections. My engineering degree remained valuable despite my parents' attempts to diminish my accomplishments. The invoice remained unpaid in my email, generating automated reminders every few days. But surrounded by the bustling energy of Pike Place Market and supported by co-workers who respected hard work over family drama, I began to believe that $5,000 in fake debt was a small price to pay for authentic freedom. 2 weeks into my Seattle life, I decided to check my college fund account balance before applying to engineering jobs that might require financial background checks. I expected to see the remaining few $1,000s I had been saving for post-graduation expenses and potential security deposits on apartments. Instead, the Wells Fargo website showed a balance of $347.12. My hands went numb as I stared at the number on my laptop screen in the hostel common room. The account should have contained over $30,000 from my grandmother's inheritance money she had specifically designated for my education and early career expenses. I clicked through to the transaction history with growing horror, discovering systematic withdrawals spanning the entire 4 years of my college attendance. The pattern was obvious once I saw it laid out chronologically. Large withdrawals coinciding with my parents' luxury vacations to Hawaii, Mexico, and Europe. Multiple $5,000 transfers labeled as home improvements that funded their kitchen renovation and backyard deck addition. Smaller but frequent withdrawals for expensive dinners, entertainment expenses, and shopping sprees that my mother had always claimed were rewards for their hard work supporting my education. The most recent withdrawal was dated Super Bowl Sunday, exactly $5,000 transferred to cover the catering costs they were now demanding I reimburse them for. They had literally used my inheritance money to pay for the party, celebrating my absence, then sent me a bill for the expenses they had already covered with funds stolen from my future. I scrolled back to the beginning of the account history, finding the original deposit from my grandmother's estate 4 years earlier. $50,000, not the $30,000 I had been told about. The accompanying memo from the estate lawyer included a scanned copy of my grandmother's handwritten letter that I had never been allowed to read. My dear Brooke, the letter began in her familiar, careful cursive. This money represents my life savings and my absolute faith in your potential. I have watched you grow into a thoughtful young man with integrity and intelligence that remind me of my own father. This inheritance is my gift to ensure you have choices in life that I never had. Use it to pursue education, travel, start a business, or simply create security while you find your path. Do not let anyone convince you this money comes with obligations or conditions beyond following your own honest judgment about what will make you happy and successful. The letter continued for 2 pages, sharing stories about her own struggles with family members who tried to control her finances and life decisions. She had specifically chosen to leave the money directly to me rather than my parents because she recognized their tendency to prioritize their own comfort over my independence. The final paragraph devastated me with its prescient wisdom. I fear your parents may try to convince you that this money belongs to the family or should be managed by them for your own good. Please remember that this inheritance represents my love for the individual person. You are becoming not payment for being someone else's expectation of who you should be. Trust yourself, sweet boy, and know that I believe in your ability to make wise decisions about your own life. I called Wells Fargo customer service with shaking fingers, speaking to a representative named Jennifer, who patiently explained the account structure. My parents had been listed as trustees with full withdrawal authority until my 25th birthday, a common arrangement for educational trusts. Since I was currently 24, they retained legal access to the funds for another 8 months. Can I stop them from taking more money? I asked, though the account balance made the question mostly academic. Unfortunately, the trust documents give them discretionary control over disbursements for education and career-related expenses, Jennifer explained with professional sympathy. The remaining balance is automatically frozen now that you've graduated, but recovering previously withdrawn funds would require legal action, challenging their fiduciary responsibility. I hung up and immediately researched lawyers specializing in trust disputes and financial elder abuse. The consultation fees alone would cost more money than I currently possessed, and several attorneys explained that proving misuse of trust funds was expensive and time-consuming with uncertain outcomes. The money was effectively gone stolen legally through paperwork my grandmother had signed in good faith. That afternoon, while working the lunch rush at Victrola, I noticed a customer who had become a regular since my first week. She usually ordered a cortado and worked on her laptop near the window, occasionally making phone calls about aircraft engineering projects. Her business cards, which I glimpsed when she paid, identified her as Sarah Mitchell from Boeing's Structural Analysis Division. During a brief lull in customers, Sarah approached the counter with her empty cup and a warm smile that reached her eyes. She had noticed my engineering textbooks during previous visits and was curious about my background. When I mentioned my recent mechanical engineering degree and job search struggles, her interest became more professional than casual. Boeing is always looking for entry-level engineers with strong analytical skills, she said, pulling up the company careers website on her phone. The online application system is terrible, though. Most of the good candidates get hired through internal referrals and department recommendations. She explained that her team was currently working on next-generation aircraft safety systems projects that required fresh perspectives and meticulous attention to detail. My coffee shop experience, she noted, demonstrated customer service skills and ability to work under pressure that many engineering graduates lacked. Would you be interested in submitting your resume directly to my department? She offered with the generosity of someone who remembered being helped by strangers. I can make sure it gets reviewed by actual engineers instead of disappearing into some automated sorting algorithm. I accepted her offer, gratefully exchanging contact information and promising to send my resume that evening. For the first time since discovering my emptied trust fund, I felt a spark of hope about my future prospects. Sarah's kindness reminded me that Seattle was full of people who judged others based on current character rather than family history. That night, my parents called with their daily harassment about the unpaid catering bill. This time, their tone had shifted from angry demands to threatening ultimatums. They claimed to have contacted debt collectors and were considering legal action to force payment. My father's voice carried the smugness of someone who believed he held all the cards. "You can't run away from your responsibilities forever, Brooke," he declared with practiced authority. "We know you're working in Seattle and we know where you're living. $5,000 plus interest is a small price compared to what we'll spend destroying your credit and employment prospects." My mother added that they had already begun calling potential employers to warn them about my financial instability and history of abandoning obligations. They somehow had access to my job application records and were systematically sabotaging my opportunities before interviews could even be scheduled. I hung up feeling defeated, but also strangely liberated. Their threats confirmed what my grandmother's letter had warned about, that they viewed me as property, rather than a person with independent rights. The inheritance theft was just another example of their fundamental inability to respect boundaries or consider my welfare above their own desires. But lying in my hostel bunk that night, I thought about Sarah's offer and Carol's mentorship and the diverse community of travelers who would welcome me without conditions. Seattle was providing opportunities to prove myself based on merit, rather than family connections or inherited wealth. My parents had stolen my grandmother's money, but they could not steal the education I had earned or the character I was developing through independence. The $5,000 catering bill remained unpaid, generating increasingly desperate voicemails and threatening text messages. But for the first time since graduation day, I felt confident that I was building something valuable that existed entirely outside their control or influence. 2 weeks after sending Sarah my resume, I was wiping down tables during the morning rush when my parents walked through Victrola's front door. I recognized my father's aggressive posture and my mother's fake smile before they even spotted me behind the espresso machine. They had driven over 2,000 miles to confront me in person, their faces showing the exhaustion and determination of people convinced they were fighting for justice. My stomach dropped as they approached the counter, clearly having no intention of ordering coffee. Other customers looked up from their laptops in conversations, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the comfortable space. Carol emerged from the back office with her instinctive radar for trouble, positioning herself within earshot but respecting my need to handle the situation. "Brooke, we need to talk," my father announced with the commanding tone he had used throughout my childhood. "You've been ignoring our calls and avoiding your responsibilities long enough." My mother pulled out a folder thick with documents, spreading papers across the counter like evidence in a courtroom. "We drove all the way here because you left us no choice," she said with martyred exhaustion. $5,000 plus interest and late fees. We have everything documented. The documents were impressively official-looking fabrications. Payment agreements supposedly signed by me during a high school acknowledging that my parents had invested in my future with the expectation of reimbursement upon graduation. Financial statements claiming I owed them money for food, housing, transportation, and educational expenses from birth to age 18. Even a fake contract suggesting I had promised to attend their Super Bowl party as repayment for college support. "These are completely made up," I said loud enough for other customers to hear. "I never signed any of these documents." My father's voice rose to match mine, attracting more attention from the morning coffee crowd. "Don't lie to us, Brooke. We have witnesses. We have records. You think you can just run away to this liberal wasteland and pretend your family doesn't exist?" The confrontation escalated when my mother revealed their most devastating weapon. They had been systematically contacting potential employers in Seattle, warning hiring managers that I was financially irresponsible and mentally unstable. They had somehow obtained my forwarded mail and tracked down every job application I had submitted. "Boeing called us back personally," my mother said with satisfaction that made my blood run cold. "We explained your history of abandoning commitments and making impulsive decisions. They thanked us for the warning about your character issues." The revelation hit me like physical violence. My parents had not only stolen my inheritance but were actively sabotaging my attempts to rebuild my life. They were weaponizing their parental authority to destroy opportunities before I could even pursue them, ensuring my continued dependence on their approval and support. My father produced another document that made my vision blur with rage. My grandmother's original will showing that she had actually left me $50,000, not the $30,000 I had discovered missing. They had been lying about even the basic facts of my inheritance, stealing $20,000 more than I had realized. Since you abandoned your family obligations, my father explained with legal precision, you forfeited any claim to inheritance money or future support. Grandmother's will specifically required you to maintain family relationships and respect parental authority. Your behavior proves you don't deserve her generosity. The will contained no such language, of course, but they presented it confidently, while other customers watched our family drama unfold in the middle of their morning routine. My mother added that they had already consulted lawyers about forcing repayment of all money spent on my upbringing, treating parenthood like a business investment requiring financial returns. The emotional breaking point arrived when my father stepped closer to the counter, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. You have 48 hours to wire us the money, Brooke, or we start legal proceedings for fraud and theft. We'll garnish your wages, destroy your credit, and make sure every employer in Seattle knows exactly what kind of person they're dealing with. My mother's fake concern was even more toxic than his open hostility. We're doing this because we love you, sweetheart, she said with practiced manipulation. You're clearly having some kind of breakdown making these impulsive decisions and hurting people who care about you. Come home where we can take care of you properly. I felt the familiar childhood sensation of drowning in their combined pressure, the psychological suffocation that had driven me to flee in the first place. My hands shook as I tried to formulate responses to their accusations and threats, feeling small and powerless despite being surrounded by supportive coworkers and customers. But then Frank stepped forward from his table near the window. Frank was a regular customer I had served dozens of times, a retired Army veteran in his 60s, who usually read military history books while drinking black coffee. He was tall and solid, with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen enough real conflict to recognize manufactured drama. Excuse me, Frank said with quiet authority that immediately commanded attention, but you folks are disrupting everyone else's morning. This young man is working, and you're preventing him from serving customers. My father turned his aggression toward Frank with the mistake of someone who had never faced actual opposition. This is a private family matter, old man. Mind your own business. Frank's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly into something more formidable. It became my business when you started making threats in public. Brooke, do you want to continue this conversation with your parents? The simple question gave me permission to make a choice I had never been allowed before. I looked at my parents, then at Frank, then at the other customers, and Carol, who were all witnessing this confrontation. For the first time in my life, I had people who would support my decision rather than demanding compliance with family expectations. No, I said with growing strength. I don't want to continue this conversation. I need them to leave. Frank nodded and addressed my parents with military directness. You heard him. Time to go. My mother's mask slipped, completely revealing the entitled rage beneath her fake concern. He owes us money. He can't just ignore his legal obligations because some stranger takes his side. The young man asked you to leave, Frank repeated without emotion. You can discuss your legal concerns through proper channels, but not here while he's working. My father made the critical error of stepping toward Frank with physical intimidation, probably expecting the same submission he had trained me to provide. Frank remained perfectly still, except for placing his hand on his phone, ready to call police if necessary. The standoff lasted only seconds before my parents realized they had encountered someone immune to their manipulation tactics. They gathered their fake documents with theatrical disgust, promising legal consequences, and continued harassment. My mother's final shot was particularly venomous. You'll come crawling back, Brooke, when reality hits and you realize you can't survive without family support. Don't expect us to welcome you home after this humiliation." They stormed out of Victrola with the dramatic flair of people convinced they were victims of injustice, leaving behind a coffee shop full of customers who had witnessed their true character. The silence after their departure felt like emerging from underwater, suddenly able to breathe freely again. Frank returned to his table without making a big deal of his intervention, understanding that I needed space to process what had just happened. Carol squeezed my shoulder and suggested I take a break, but I preferred to stay busy serving customers who treated me with ordinary human decency. That night in my hostel bunk, I stared at the ceiling knowing my parents would escalate their campaign of harassment and sabotage. They had driven across the country to confront me personally, which suggested desperation, but also dangerous determination. Their threats about contacting Boeing felt credible, potentially destroying my best opportunity for professional employment. But I also felt something new and powerful growing inside me. Frank's intervention had shown me that other people could recognize my parents' behavior as inappropriate and abusive. I was not crazy or ungrateful for wanting to escape their control. My reactions were normal responses to abnormal treatment, validated by strangers who had no reason to take my side, except basic human decency. The confrontation had also revealed the full extent of their financial theft and ongoing sabotage efforts. With that information, I could begin planning counter-strategies instead of simply enduring their attacks. My grandmother's letter had warned me about exactly this situation, and her wisdom was becoming my roadmap for resistance and recoveries. Seattle was teaching me that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and support, rather than fear and obligation. The community I was building at Victrola and the Green Tortoise Hostel offered examples of healthy human connections that energized rather than depleted me. My parents' visit had been meant to intimidate me back into compliance, but instead it had strengthened my resolve to build a life entirely outside their influence. The morning after my parents' confrontation at Victrola, I was restocking coffee beans when my phone rang with Sarah's number. I braced myself for bad news, certain that my parents had successfully sabotaged my Boeing opportunity with their warnings about my supposed mental instability and financial irresponsibility. Instead, Sarah's voice carried confusion and concern. "Brooke, I heard about some kind of family situation yesterday," she said carefully. "Are you okay? Frank from the coffee shop is actually my neighbor's friend, and word gets around pretty quickly in our building." The revelation that Frank was connected to Sarah felt like destiny rather than coincidence. Seattle's network of decent people was apparently smaller and more interconnected than I had realized. Sarah explained that Frank had mentioned the confrontation to his neighbor who had shared the story with Sarah when he recognized my name. "The thing is," Sarah continued with growing confidence, "nobody from Boeing ever spoke to your parents about you. I checked with our hiring department and security office. Your name hasn't come up in any background check conversations or reference calls." My relief was so intense, I had to sit down behind the espresso machine. My parents had lied about contacting Boeing, probably hoping their bluff would scare me into paying their fake catering bill. Their desperation was becoming more obvious as their actual power over my life diminished. Sarah's news got even better. She had scheduled my interview for the following Thursday with her department head Marcus and 2 senior engineers working on next-generation aircraft safety systems. My resume had impressed them, particularly my academic achievements combined with customer service experience that demonstrated practical problem-solving skills. "They're looking for someone who can think systematically about complex problems while communicating clearly with diverse teams," Sarah explained. "Your engineering background plus coffee shop experience actually makes you stand out from typical candidates who only have classroom knowledge." That afternoon, Frank approached my counter during a quiet moment with his usual black coffee order and a gentle smile. He asked how I was handling my family situation without prying for details, offering support with the wisdom of someone who had navigated his own complicated relationships. "Some families are toxic, son," he said with matter-of-fact acceptance. "Military taught me that blood relation doesn't automatically create healthy relationships. You build your real family from people who support your growth instead of demanding your submission. Frank's words resonated deeply as I prepared for my Boeing interview. He offered to conduct practice interviews, drawing on his experience hiring civilian contractors during his Army career. His questions were direct and practical, focusing on problem-solving approaches and communication skills rather than personal background drama. During our practice sessions at the hostel common room, Frank helped me understand that my parents' behavior followed predictable patterns of manipulation and control. He had seen similar dynamics among soldiers with abusive families, and he recognized the signs of psychological manipulation designed to maintain dependence and compliance. "They're scared of losing control over you," Frank explained after a particularly intense practice interview. "That's why they escalated to personal confrontation and threats. Independent adults don't owe their parents money for raising them, Brooke. That's not how healthy families work." I began documenting everything about my parents' harassment and financial theft, creating a detailed timeline with supporting evidence. Frank suggested treating the situation like an intelligence-gathering operation, collecting facts systematically rather than reacting emotionally to each new attack. The documentation process revealed disturbing patterns I had not fully recognized. My parents had been using my Social Security number for various financial purposes throughout college, opening credit cards and taking out small loans without my knowledge. My credit report showed several accounts I had never authorized, along with late payments and collection notices that explained why my job applications might be flagged during background checks. Carol provided employment records showing my reliability and quick advancement at Victrola documentation that contradicted my parents' claims about my instability and irresponsibility. She also connected me with other employees who had overcome family trauma, creating an informal support network of people rebuilding their lives in Seattle. The week leading up to my Boeing interview, I threw myself into preparation with the intensity of someone whose entire future depended on this opportunity. I researched the company's current projects, studied aircraft safety regulations, and practiced explaining complex engineering concepts in accessible language that non-technical team members could understand. Frank's military discipline proved invaluable for interview preparation. He helped me develop confident body language, clear speaking patterns, and systematic approaches to technical questions. Most importantly, he taught me to view the interview as a mutual evaluation rather than a desperate plea for acceptance. "You're not begging for this job, Brooke," Frank reminded me during our final practice session. "You're demonstrating how your skills can contribute to their projects. Confidence comes from knowing you have value to offer, not from hoping they'll overlook your weaknesses." The night before my interview, I received another round of threatening texts from my parents demanding payment of the catering bill plus accumulated late fees. They claimed to have hired a collection agency and threatened to garnish my wages once I found employment. The timing felt intentional, designed to shake my confidence before the important meeting. But surrounded by Frank's calm wisdom and Carol's practical support, their threats felt more pathetic than frightening. I was building a life based on genuine achievement and healthy relationships, while they remained trapped in their patterns of manipulation and control. Their power over me was dissolving as I developed independence and self-respect. The documentation I had gathered revealed not just their financial theft, but also their systematic attempts to sabotage my recovery. That evidence would become crucial in the coming weeks, but for now, it served to remind me that their behavior was abnormal and unacceptable, rather than something I deserved or had caused. Seattle's community of caring strangers was teaching me lessons my family had never provided about mutual respect, personal boundaries, and genuine support. Frank's intervention during the coffee shop confrontation had shown me that other people could recognize abuse and choose to help, rather than ignore uncomfortable situations. As I reviewed my technical knowledge and practiced answering interview questions, I felt grateful for the painful journey that had brought me to this point. My parents' betrayal had forced me to develop resilience and independence that would serve me well beyond any single job opportunity. Their attempt to control me through fear and financial manipulation had backfired, pushing me toward people and experiences that truly supported my growth and potential. The Boeing interview represented more than just employment opportunity. It was a chance to prove that I could succeed based on merit and character, rather than family connections or inherited wealth. My grandmother's stolen inheritance had been meant to provide security and choices, but the education and values she had also given me were proving more valuable than money my parents could steal. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp Seattle air that made everything feel possible. I dressed in my one good suit, reviewed my technical notes one final time, and walked toward Boeing's facilities with Frank's advice echoing in my mind. I was not begging for this opportunity. I was demonstrating my value and potential to people who would judge me fairly based on my actual capabilities and character. My interview at Boeing exceeded every expectation I had dared to maintain. Marcus, the department head, was a soft-spoken engineer in his 40s, who began our conversation by asking about my transition to Seattle, rather than jumping immediately into technical questions. When I briefly mentioned seeking new opportunities after graduation, he nodded with understanding that suggested personal experience with major life changes. The technical portion of the interview felt more like collaborative problem-solving than interrogation. Sarah's team was developing predictive maintenance systems for aircraft safety, using sensor data and machine learning algorithms to identify potential component failures before they became dangerous. My mechanical engineering background combined with customer service experience from Victrola provided exactly the interdisciplinary perspective they needed. "We can teach anyone the specific technical skills," Marcus explained while reviewing my academic transcripts, "but we need people who can think systematically about complex problems while communicating clearly with diverse stakeholders. Your coffee shop experience tells us you can work under pressure and adapt to unexpected situations." The senior engineers asked detailed questions about my senior design project, an automated quality control system for manufacturing processes. My answers demonstrated not just technical competence, but also practical understanding of how engineering solutions must account for human factors and real-world constraints. They seemed impressed by my ability to explain complex concepts in accessible language. 2 hours after arriving, Marcus offered me a position as junior aerospace engineer with a starting salary of $75,000 plus comprehensive benefits including health insurance, retirement contributions, and professional development opportunities. The salary was more money than I had ever imagined, earning enough to establish genuine financial independence and security. But my celebration was interrupted that evening when a process server knocked on my hostel room door. The legal papers he handed me made my vision blur with panic and rage. My parents had filed for emergency conservatorship, claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown, abandoned my family responsibilities, and demonstrated inability to manage my own finances or make rational life decisions. The petition requested legal control over my income, housing choices, medical decisions, and major life choices. It included fabricated evidence that painted me as mentally incompetent, doctored medical records suggesting psychiatric treatment. I had never received testimony from family friends claiming I exhibited erratic and dangerous behavior, and financial statements portraying me as incapable of managing money responsibly. They were using my spontaneous move to Seattle as primary evidence of mental instability, describing it as an impulsive flight from reality rather than a rational decision to escape abuse. The legal documents characterized my refusal to pay their catering bill as further proof of my disconnect from financial reality and social obligations. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, giving me minimal time to prepare a defense against accusations I had never anticipated. If successful, the conservatorship would grant my parents legal authority over every aspect of my adult life, essentially making me their property until they chose to release control. I sat on my hostel bunk that night, surrounded by legal papers that threatened to destroy everything I had built in Seattle. The Boeing job offered my growing independence, my supportive community of friends and coworkers. All of it could be stripped away if a judge decided I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. Frank found me in the common room the next morning, staring blankly at my laptop screen, while other travelers chatted about their adventures. He took one look at the legal papers scattered across my table and immediately understood the severity of my situation. Without asking permission, he pulled out his phone and called a contact from his Army days. "Maria Rodriguez," he said after a brief conversation, family law attorney who specializes in abuse cases. She's agreed to meet with you this afternoon for a consultation. Pro bono initial assessment because she recognizes emergency conservatorship abuse when she sees it. Maria's office was located in a converted Victorian house near Capitol Hill, her waiting room filled with legal books and advocacy posters about domestic violence and elder abuse. She was a woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had fought many battles against family manipulation and control. "This conservatorship filing is textbook abusive," Maria declared after reviewing my parents' petition for 15 minutes. "They're weaponizing the legal system to regain control over an adult child who escaped their influence. Everything about this screams retaliation rather than genuine concern for your welfare." She explained that emergency conservatorships were designed to protect people who genuinely could not care for themselves, typically involving severe mental illness, dementia, or addiction. My parents were exploiting the system by fabricating evidence and misrepresenting normal life choices as signs of incompetence. "The good news is that their evidence is obviously fabricated," Maria continued while taking notes about my situation. "Medical records can be verified. Witness testimony can be challenged, and your actual behavior since arriving in Seattle contradicts their claims about mental instability." The bad news was that defending against conservatorship required immediate action and extensive documentation. We had less than 2 weeks to gather evidence of my competence and stability while exposing my parents' pattern of abuse and manipulation. The process would be expensive and time-consuming, but Maria agreed to represent me with a payment plan that accommodated my limited finances. Marcus at Boeing proved unexpectedly supportive when I explained my legal situation during our follow-up meeting to finalize employment paperwork. Rather than withdrawing the job offer due to family complications, he connected me with Boeing's Employee Assistance Program and offered flexible scheduling for legal appointments. "We've hired plenty of people escaping difficult family situations," Marcus said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who had seen everything. "Your parents' behavior reflects on them, not you. Focus on preparing your defense while we handle the onboarding process." Sarah became an invaluable ally in documenting my professional competence and mental stability. She provided detailed accounts of my interview performance, systematic thinking processes, and clear communication skills that directly contradicted claims about cognitive impairment or irrational behavior. Her testimony would be crucial in demonstrating my capacity for complex decision-making. Frank organized the entire hostel community to provide character witness testimony. The diverse group of international travelers, local artists, and working professionals offered to testify about my rational behavior, emotional stability, and responsible decision-making since arriving in Seattle. Their observations would counter my parents' claims about erratic and dangerous conduct. Carol from Victrola provided employment records, documenting my reliability, customer service excellence, and rapid promotion to supervisory responsibilities. The timeline of my professional growth in Seattle directly contradicted allegations about inability to maintain employment or handle responsibility. Her testimony would establish a pattern of competence rather than breakdown. Maria's investigation revealed that my parents had attempted similar conservatorship filings against other family members in the past. My uncle had successfully defended against their efforts 5 years earlier, and 2 cousins had obtained restraining orders after harassment campaigns similar to what I was experiencing. The pattern suggested systematic abuse rather than isolated concern. The legal preparation process was exhausting, but also empowering. For the first time in my life, I was fighting back against my parents' control with professional support and systematic evidence rather than just emotional reactions. Maria's expertise gave me confidence that the legal system could protect me rather than enabling further abuse. As the hearing date approached, I felt nervous, but not hopeless. The community I had built in Seattle was rallying to support my independence, providing testimony and evidence that painted a clear picture of competent adult decision-making rather than mental breakdown. My parents' accusations were falling apart under scrutiny from people who actually knew me and witnessed my behavior. The conservatorship attempt had revealed the full extent of my parents' desperation to regain control over my life. They were willing to use the most extreme legal weapons available, falsifying evidence and weaponizing mental health stigma to force my compliance. But their overreach had also exposed their true character to neutral observers who could recognize abuse when they saw it clearly documented. 2 weeks before my 25th birthday, I was about to defend my fundamental right to self-determination in a courtroom battle that would determine whether I remained a free adult or became legal property of people who valued control over my well-being. The stakes could not have been higher, but I was no longer fighting alone. 1 week before the conservatorship hearing, Maria's investigation yielded a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing my credit reports and financial documents for evidence to present in court, we uncovered a pattern of suspicious insurance claims filed using my personal information over the past 3 years. My parents had been systematically committing federal insurance fraud using my social security number and forged signatures. The scheme was sophisticated and extensive. They had filed false property damage claims with their homeowner's insurance, claiming expensive electronics and jewelry were stolen during fabricated break-ins. Medical insurance fraud included billing for treatments I never received at clinics I had never visited. Auto insurance claims reported accidents that never happened with repair bills for damage to vehicles I had never driven. Each fraudulent claim used my information as either the victim or the beneficiary, creating a paper trail that implicated me in crimes I knew nothing about. The total amount of fraudulent claims exceeded $200,000 over 3 years, making this a federal case rather than simple family dispute. "This is huge, Brooke," Maria said while spreading the evidence across her conference table. "Your parents have been using your identity for systematic insurance fraud. This goes way beyond family financial abuse into federal criminal territory." I stared at the stack of false claims and forged documents with growing horror and strange relief. The evidence was devastating, but also liberating. It proved beyond doubt that my parents were criminals rather than concerned family members. Their conservatorship filing was clearly an attempt to regain control before I could expose their illegal activities. Maria immediately contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the Postal Inspection Service, both of which had been investigating patterns of insurance fraud in our region. My documentation provided missing pieces they needed to build cases against fraud rings operating across multiple states. My parents were apparently part of a larger criminal network, rather than isolated bad actors. The federal investigation moved quickly once authorities realized the conservatorship filing was designed to silence a potential witness and victim. Special Agent Jennifer Torres from the Postal Inspection Service interviewed me extensively about my parents' financial behavior and my relationship with their insurance claims. Insurance fraud often involves family members who have access to personal information and can forge signatures convincingly, Agent Torres explained during our interview. Your parents' conservatorship filing fits a pattern we see when perpetrators realize their victims are becoming aware of the crimes. The timing became even more suspicious when investigators discovered that my parents had accelerated their fraud activities in the months leading up to my graduation. They had filed multiple large claims during my senior year, apparently planning to blame me for any irregularities once I became financially independent and potentially troublesome. 3 days before the conservatorship hearing, federal agents executed search warrants on my parents' home and vehicles. The evidence they seized included computers with drafted insurance forms, fake receipts for non-existent purchases, and correspondence with other fraud participants across several states. My parents were arrested that evening and charged with federal mail fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The conservatorship hearing became a completely different proceeding than anyone had anticipated. Instead of defending my mental competence, I was testifying as a witness in a federal criminal case while my parents sat in jail awaiting arraignment. Judge Patricia Williams dismissed their petition immediately after reviewing the arrest warrants and fraud evidence. This court finds no credible evidence that Mr. Brooke requires conservatorship, Judge Williams declared with obvious disgust at my parents' manipulation of the legal system. Furthermore, the evidence suggests this filing was made in bad faith as part of an attempt to control a witness in ongoing federal investigations. The judge went further, issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting my parents from contacting me or interfering with my employment. She commended my courage in exposing criminal activity and noted that my decision to move to Seattle demonstrated exactly the kind of mature judgment that conservatorship is designed to protect rather than restrict. Mr. Brooke has shown remarkable resilience and sound decision-making in escaping an abusive situation and building an independent life, Judge Williams continued. His parents' attempt to use this court as a weapon of control is exactly the kind of abuse that undermines public confidence in protective legal processes. The federal prosecutors offered my parents plea agreements that included 18-month prison sentences and full restitution to insurance companies and fraud victims. The restitution orders totaled over $300,000, including the $50,000 stolen from my grandmother's inheritance account. I would receive full recovery of my educational trust fund, plus interest and penalties. Marcus at Boeing proved incredibly supportive throughout the legal proceedings, understanding that my family situation involved criminal victimization rather than personal drama. The company's legal department offered additional protection if needed, and formally documented my cooperation with federal law enforcement as positive character evidence for future background checks. Sarah organized a celebration dinner at her apartment with Frank and several other friends who had supported me through the conservatorship battle. The gathering felt like a chosen family, celebrating victory over forces that had tried to destroy one of their own. For the first time since graduation, I felt genuinely safe and supported. The evening news covered my parents' arrests as part of a broader investigation into insurance fraud rings operating across the Pacific Northwest. Seeing their mugshots on television while surrounded by friends who cared about my well-being created a surreal sense of closure. They were no longer my family problem. They were criminals facing federal prosecution. Frank raised a toast that captured the significance of the moment perfectly. To Brooke, who had the courage to walk away from people who called themselves family but acted like enemies. Real family supports your growth instead of stealing your future. The legal victory was complete, but also bittersweet. I had proven my competence and exposed my parents' crimes, but the process had also forced me to accept that the people who raised me were fundamentally toxic and manipulative. Winning felt like surviving, rather than celebrating necessary but emotionally exhausting. That night, I called Maria to thank her for brilliant legal work that had saved my independence and possibly my life. Without her expertise and aggressive investigation, my parents might have successfully gained legal control over my future and silenced me permanently about their criminal activities. You did the hard part. Brooke Maria replied with professional satisfaction tempered by personal warmth. You had the courage to leave an abusive situation and the intelligence to document everything carefully. My job was just presenting your evidence effectively. The conservatorship battle had lasted only 3 weeks, but felt like a lifetime of growth and change. I had learned to fight for myself with professional support and systematic evidence rather than just emotional reactions. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about legal rights, financial protection, and the difference between healthy and toxic family relationships. Most importantly, the victory had been achieved through community support rather than individual struggle. Frank, Sarah, Carol, Maria, and dozens of other people had chosen to help me fight against injustice they recognized as threatening to anyone who valued freedom and dignity. Seattle had proven to be not just a place to escape my past, but a community that would actively protect my future. As federal prosecutors prepared their cases and my parents awaited trial from jail cells, I was finally free to build the life my grandmother had envisioned when she left me that inheritance. The money would be restored, but more valuable was the knowledge that I could survive and thrive independently when supported by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. 6 months after the conservatorship hearing, I stood in the lobby of Boeing's Everett facility, holding a promotion letter that still felt surreal. Marcus had recommended me for the Advanced Safety Systems Development Team, recognizing my analytical skills and systematic thinking that had proven invaluable during our aircraft sensor projects. My salary had increased to $95,000 with expanded responsibilities and leadership opportunities. The federal prosecutors had secured guilty pleas from my parents, who received 18-month prison sentences and restitution orders totaling over $350,000. The investigation had expanded to include 12 other family fraud rings across 6 states, making national news as one of the largest insurance fraud busts in Pacific Northwest history. I received full restoration of my grandmother's $50,000 inheritance, plus accumulated interest and legal penalties. The restitution money had allowed me to move into a beautiful 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, furnish it with quality pieces that reflected my personal taste, and establish an emergency fund that provided genuine financial security. More importantly, the legal victory had given me psychological closure, official recognition that my parents' treatment constituted criminal abuse rather than normal family dynamics. Sarah and I had been dating seriously for 4 months, our relationship deepening from friendship into genuine romance, built on mutual respect and shared values. She appreciated my resilience and integrity, while I admired her loyalty and professional competence. We had moved in together the previous month, creating the stable and loving partnership I had never experienced growing up. Living with Sarah felt like discovering what healthy relationships actually looked like. We supported each other's career goals, shared household responsibilities equitably, and communicated openly about problems instead of using manipulation or emotional warfare. Her family welcomed me warmly, providing examples of functional family dynamics that helped heal some of my childhood wounds. Frank had become the father figure I had always needed, teaching me practical life skills and emotional intelligence that my parents had never bothered to provide. He helped me buy my first car, navigate apartment leasing, and understand investment strategies for building long-term wealth. His military experience offered valuable perspectives on discipline, planning, and resilience that served me well in professional settings. The hostel community had evolved into a chosen family that celebrated each other's successes and provided support during challenges. Several former residents had settled permanently in Seattle, creating an informal network of people who understood the courage required to rebuild life after escaping toxic situations. We gathered monthly for dinner parties that felt more authentically familial than any holiday I had experienced with my biological relatives. Carol had offered me partnership opportunities in expanding Victrola's business, recognizing my natural leadership abilities and customer relationship skills. While I declined to focus on my engineering career, I maintained weekend shifts because I genuinely enjoyed the work and community connections. The coffee shop had been my first taste of independence, and returning regularly reminded me how far I had traveled. My relationship with extended family members had complicated as other relatives learned about my parents' criminal convictions. Several cousins and my uncle reached out to share their own experiences of financial manipulation and emotional abuse, creating a network of family survivors supporting each other's recovery. We had collectively decided to maintain relationships with each other, while excluding my parents entirely. The most meaningful development was my volunteer work at the community center, where I had first learned about abuse recovery resources. I facilitated support groups for young adults escaping family trauma, sharing practical strategies for building independence and recognizing healthy relationships. Helping others navigate similar challenges gave deeper meaning to my own recovery process. Boeing's Employee Assistance Program had connected me with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse recovery. Through regular sessions, I had processed the complex emotions surrounding my parents' betrayal and learned to distinguish between legitimate guilt and manipulative programming. Therapy had been essential for developing healthy relationship patterns and professional confidence. The federal investigation had revealed that my parents' fraud activities dated back over 10 years, involving dozens of victims and hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal claims. Their criminal network included insurance agents, medical providers, and repair shops across multiple states. My cooperation with investigators had been crucial for prosecuting the entire organization. Most surprisingly, I had reconnected with my grandmother's memory in powerful ways since recovering her inheritance. I visited her gravesite for the first time since childhood, bringing flowers and sharing stories about using her money exactly as she had intended, building foundations for independent success and authentic happiness. Her handwritten letter had become my guide for making major life decisions. The inheritance money was being invested systematically for long-term wealth building, following Frank's advice about diversified portfolios and emergency fund maintenance. I had also established a scholarship fund at my alma mater for students escaping family financial abuse, ensuring that my grandmother's generosity would continue helping others achieve educational independence. Looking back on the journey from graduation day parking lot breakdown to professional success and genuine love relationship, I realized that my parents' betrayal had actually freed me to discover my authentic self and build meaningful connections. Their attempts to control me through financial manipulation had backfired completely, forcing me to develop independence and resilience I never would have gained otherwise. The most important lesson had been learning to distinguish between family roles and family relationships. Biology created roles and legal obligations, but genuine family relationships were built through mutual support, respect, and love. My chosen family in Seattle provided better emotional support and practical guidance than my biological relatives had ever offered. True family members wanted to see you grow and succeed according to your own values and goals. They celebrated your achievements without claiming credit or demanding payment. They offered advice and support without strings attached or hidden agendas. They respected your boundaries and decisions even when they disagreed with your choices. The legal victory had been satisfying, but the personal growth was more valuable than any financial restitution. I had learned to trust my own judgment, set healthy boundaries, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation. The confidence that came from surviving my parents' worst attacks had prepared me for any future challenges. My parents would be released from federal prison in 12 months, but they would have no legal authority or practical power over my life. The restraining orders remained permanent. Their criminal records would follow them forever, and their attempts to contact me would result in additional federal charges. I was completely protected from future harassment or manipulation. Standing in my apartment that evening, surrounded by furniture I had chosen and paid for with money I had earned, I felt grateful for the painful journey that had brought me to this point of genuine independence and security. My parents had intended their betrayal to force my continued dependence, but instead it had launched me toward freedom. They could never steal or control. Sarah joined me on our balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, the Seattle skyline sparkling in the distance like possibilities waiting to be explored. We talked about our plans for the future career advancement opportunities, travel destinations we wanted to visit together, and the family we might create based on love and respect, rather than manipulation and control. The one-way ticket I had purchased in that parking lot after graduation had indeed changed my life forever, but not in ways I could have imagined during that moment of desperation and tears. It had carried me away from people who called themselves family, but acted like enemies toward a community that welcomed me as I was while supporting who I was becoming. My grandmother's inheritance had finally served its intended purpose, providing choices and security that allowed me to build authentic relationships and meaningful work. But her greater gift was the letter reminding me to trust my own judgment about what would make me happy and successful. That wisdom had guided every important decision since leaving home. The Super Bowl party my parents had prioritized over my graduation had cost them relationships with their son, their freedom, and their reputation. The $5,000 catering bill they had demanded from me was now being paid through federal restitution orders funded by selling their house and liquidating their assets. Justice had been served in ways more complete than I could have imagined. Most importantly, I had learned that recovery from family abuse was not just possible, but could lead to better relationships and opportunities than staying trapped in toxic dynamics. Breaking free from my parents' control had been terrifying, but necessary for discovering my own potential and building genuine happiness. The journey from abandoned graduation ceremony to federal courtroom victory had taught me that sometimes the people who should love and support you most are actually the greatest obstacles to your growth and success. Having the courage to walk away from toxic family relationships despite social pressure and emotional manipulation had been the most important decision of my life. Seattle's community of caring strangers had become my real family, proving that love and support could be freely given without conditions or expectations of repayment. Frank's intervention, Sarah's professional guidance, Carol's mentorship, and Maria's legal expertise had all been gifts from people who chose to help rather than exploit my vulnerability. As I looked toward the future with Sarah beside me and supportive friends around us, I felt confident that the worst was behind me and the best was yet to come. My parents' attempts to destroy my independence had instead taught me how strong and capable I could be when supported by people who genuinely wanted to see me succeed. The inheritance my grandmother had left was finally being used exactly as she had intended. Not just for financial security, but for the freedom to choose relationships and opportunities based on what would make me truly happy and successful, rather than what others demanded or expected. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is struggling with similar decisions. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more content about overcoming life challenges and building authentic relationships. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the possibility of recovery and growth after family trauma. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you have the strength to build the life you deserve, surrounded by people who truly support your happiness and success.